It was a bright Saturday afternoon in the city. The sun reflected off the glass windows of luxury stores lined up along the busy shopping street. Expensive cars passed by one after another, and people walked with shopping bags from high-end brands. Inside one of those stores, a young salesman stood behind the counter, polishing a display case full of luxury watches. The air smelled faintly of leather and new wood, the kind of scent that always reminded people they were in a place meant for the rich. The salesman was confident. He had been working there for 2 years and had learned to recognize who was likely to buy and who was just wasting time. At least that's what he believed. He loved the attention he got from well-dressed clients, the ones who wore shiny shoes, designer suits, and expensive perfumes. To him, those were real customers. Everyone else was just passing time. The doorbell chimed softly, announcing a new visitor. The salesman looked up casually, expecting another regular shopper. But when he saw the man walking in, his expression changed a little. The man was dressed neatly but casually, jeans, sneakers, and a plain jacket. He wasn't wearing any flashy jewelry or carrying anything that screamed wealth. His walk was calm and confident, but something about his quiet appearance made the salesman underestimate him right away. The man looked around the store, admiring the rows of watches displayed under the bright lights. Each one had a small card with a price that could buy a small car. He smiled faintly, not in awe, but in appreciation. He clearly understood what he was looking at. He stepped closer to one of the glass displays and leaned slightly forward to see the details of a watch inside. It had a silver body and a deep blue dial, simple yet elegant. The salesman watched him for a few seconds and then returned to wiping the counter. He didn't bother greeting him. Instead, he turned to another customer nearby who looked like he had just stepped out of a business meeting. "Good afternoon, sir. Would you like to see our newest collection?" he said, smiling broadly. The businessman nodded, and the salesman quickly attended to him, offering him a seat and a bottle of water. The man in jeans stood there quietly. He noticed the difference immediately. He wasn't greeted. No one offered him anything, but he didn't say a word. Instead, he waited patiently until the other customer finished and left. Then he walked up to the counter and said politely, "Excuse me, could I take a look at that one?" He pointed to the silver and blue watch he had been admiring earlier. The salesman glanced up briefly, looked at the watch he was pointing to, then looked back at him. His tone changed, polite but dry. "That model is quite expensive, sir," he said with a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It starts at around $25,000. He said it as if it was a warning, not information. The man nodded slowly, his voice still calm. "Yes, I know. I'd like to take a closer look." The salesman hesitated. He didn't like showing such watches to people who didn't look like serious buyers. In his mind, time was money, and he preferred spending it on customers who might actually purchase. "It's a limited edition piece," he added, hoping the man would back off. "We only have one left." "It's not really for casual viewing." The man smiled faintly, not offended but clearly noticing the tone. "I understand," he said softly, "but I'm interested. I just want to see it." The salesman sighed quietly as if doing him a favor and unlocked the display case. He took out the watch carefully using a pair of gloves and placed it on a velvet pad in front of the man. "This is the Platinum C-Line model," he explained, his voice carrying a hint of pride. "Handcrafted with only 50 made worldwide. It's not for everyone." The man bent down slightly, studying the details closely. "Beautiful design," he said. "What movement does it use?" The salesman blinked. He wasn't expecting such a technical question. It's automatic," he replied vaguely, trying to sound confident. The man nodded, then asked another question about the material of the strap and the mechanism. The salesman gave short answers, clearly uninterested in the conversation. As the man lifted the watch slightly to get a better look at the dial, the salesman spoke again, this time with a slightly sharper tone. "Please be careful, sir. That's worth more than most people make in a year." The words hung in the air. The man paused for a second, then gently placed the watch back on the pad. He looked at the salesman quietly, his expression unreadable. "I see," he said calmly. "Thank you." The salesman gave a quick nod, already turning away to adjust something behind the counter. He didn't notice the faint sigh the man let out or the way his fingers briefly tapped the glass, not in anger but in disappointment. After a few moments, the man spoke again. "You've got a good selection here," he said, still polite. "Do you often get customers asking for rare pieces?" The salesman shrugged. "Only serious buyers," he said flatly. "Most people just come to look around, take pictures, ask questions, and leave." "Happens every day," the man smiled slightly. "I see. Well, it's good to know business is going well." There was something calm but deep in his tone, the kind that carried quiet authority. The salesman noticed it for a split second but brushed it off. To him, it was just another conversation with someone who couldn't afford the products. The man looked around one last time, his eyes moving over the store, the lights, the displays, and finally landing back on the salesman. "You've been working here long?" he asked. 2 years, the salesman said proudly. "Best performing associate for 5 months straight." "Impressive," the man said kindly. "You must really know your products." The salesman smiled, thinking the man was complimenting him. "Yes, I do. And I can usually tell when someone's ready to buy and when they're just looking. It's part of the job." The man's smile faded just slightly, his eyes softening. "That must be a useful skill," he said quietly. "It is," the salesman said quickly. "Saves time, for both of us," the man nodded. "Time is valuable," he said thoughtfully. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out his phone. He typed something briefly, not in a rush, just a few notes. The salesman noticed and raised an eyebrow. "If you'd like, I can give you a brochure," he said, trying to wrap up the interaction. "You can look through it later. Maybe online options fit your range better." The man looked up at him and smiled gently. "No, that's all right," he said. "You've given me enough information." He placed the brochure back on the counter without taking it. The salesman shrugged and locked the display case again. "Well, thank you for stopping by," he said, turning away. The man looked at the watches one last time, then said quietly, "You have a nice store here. I hope the people who come in are always treated well." Something in his tone made the salesman look at him again. For a moment, their eyes met. The man's calm, steady gaze made the salesman feel slightly uneasy, though he couldn't explain why. Before he could reply, the man nodded politely and walked toward the door. As the bell rang again, the salesman exhaled and muttered under his breath, "Another window shopper." He returned to polishing the counter, feeling a mix of pride and irritation. He didn't realize that the man who had just walked out was far more important than anyone he had served that day. Outside, the man stopped for a moment, glancing back through the glass window. His reflection appeared faintly beside the display of luxury watches. He didn't look angry, just thoughtful. He looked down at the name tag he had noticed on the salesman's chest earlier and quietly typed it into his phone, saving it. Then he slipped his phone into his pocket, straightened his jacket, and walked away calmly, disappearing into the flow of people on the street. Inside, the salesman moved on to the next customer, smiling brightly this time because the new visitor wore a gold watch and designer shoes. He didn't think twice about the man who had just left, but in a few hours, everything about that quiet afternoon would come back to him. The calm man, the simple clothes, the polite voice. And he'd wish he had treated that moment differently. The next morning, the store opened at its usual time. The air smelled of fresh polish and coffee from the staff room. The salesman came in early, wearing his best suit. He still felt proud of himself. In his mind, yesterday had been a normal day. He had attended to several good customers, made one big sale, and even received praise from the manager for his neat display arrangement. He didn't think much about the man who had walked in wearing jeans and a plain jacket. To him, it was just another visitor who didn't belong in a place like that. As the day went on, more customers came and went. The salesman kept his confident smile, moving swiftly between the counters, showing off the latest luxury watches and explaining the details like a pro. He liked hearing the soft clicks when the watch cases opened, and he loved the sound of the credit card machine printing receipts. That sound to him was success. By afternoon, the store was calm again. Only a few customers remained. The salesman was rearranging the display when one of the junior staff members walked over and whispered, "Hey, I think the regional office might visit soon." The salesman looked up. "Really? When?" "Not sure," the junior replied. The manager said something about a surprise visit. "Maybe to check store performance." The salesman nodded, straightening his tie. He wasn't worried. He thought of himself as the best employee there. He knew how to sell, how to talk, and how to charm people. If anyone from the regional team came, He was confident he'd make a great impression. Around 3 o'clock, a man in a suit walked in, not a customer this time, but a courier delivering some documents. The salesman greeted him quickly, signed the papers, and went back to his work. He didn't notice that the manager had stepped out to make a phone call, his expression serious. An hour passed. The store was quiet again, and the salesman was chatting with another employee about weekend plans. Then the glass door opened softly. A familiar face stepped in, the same man from yesterday. He looked exactly the same. Calm expression, neat but casual clothes, and a polite smile. The salesman froze for a moment, unsure whether to greet him or not. The memory of their conversation flashed in his mind, how he had told the man that the watch was not for everyone. For a brief second, he felt slightly awkward, but then he brushed it off. Maybe the man had come back because he was actually interested in buying something after all. He quickly put on his professional smile and said, "Good afternoon, sir. Back again today?" The man smiled politely. "Yes, I wanted to take another look at the collection," he said. "Of course," the salesman replied, trying to sound confident. "Would you like to see the same model as yesterday? Or maybe something more suitable?" The man looked at him silently for a second, then nodded slowly. "Let's look at the same one." The salesman turned to unlock the display case, pretending not to feel uneasy. He carefully took out the same silver and blue watch and placed it on the counter. "Still as beautiful as ever," he said quickly. "A timeless design." The man picked it up and turned it in his hands. "It really is," he said softly. "You know, this particular model has an interesting story behind it." The salesman raised an eyebrow. "Oh, what story?" The man looked up at him and said calmly, "It was designed to represent precision and respect, the kind of respect that comes from craftsmanship and trust." The salesman gave a quick nod, not sure how to respond. "Yes, that's true," he said vaguely. "It's a masterpiece." The man set the watch down gently and said, "And how has business been today?" "Good," the salesman replied proudly. "A few good sales. You know how weekends are, busy but profitable." The man nodded thoughtfully. "That's good to hear. It's always interesting to see how people are treated when they walk into places like this." Something in his tone made the salesman's stomach tighten a little. He didn't know why, but the words felt heavier than they sounded. Before he could reply, the store's manager walked in from the back office. The moment he saw the man standing at the counter, his eyes widened. "Oh, sir, I didn't know you were here already," the manager said, rushing forward. He looked both shocked and nervous. The salesman turned to him, confused. "You know him?" The manager almost dropped the folder he was holding. "Of course I do. Everyone in the company does." He turned to the man in the jacket and said respectfully, "Sir, we didn't expect you to arrive in person. If you'd told us ahead, we'd have been better prepared." The salesman blinked, trying to understand what was happening. The man smiled calmly and said, "No need for that. I just wanted to visit quietly and see things for myself." The store fell silent. The junior staff members nearby exchanged quick, surprised glances. The salesman's mouth went dry. He looked at the man again, the calm expression, the simple clothes, the polite tone, and it suddenly hit him. This wasn't an ordinary customer. The manager continued speaking, his tone full of respect. "Everyone, this is Mr. Williams, our regional executive." The salesman felt the ground beneath him shift. His heart raced. His mind replayed everything from yesterday. Every word, every look, every careless comment. "This model costs more than most people make in a year. Maybe you'd prefer something more affordable. It's not really for casual viewing." The words echoed in his head like loud bells. He swallowed hard, but his throat felt dry. The executive looked at him now, not angry, not loud, just calm. "We met yesterday, didn't we?" he said softly. The salesman tried to speak, but his voice caught. Yes, sir, I didn't realize." "I know," the executive said gently. "That's why I came back today." The manager stood beside them, tense. "Sir, I assure you this isn't how we normally treat our customers." "I deeply apologize." The executive held up his hand, stopping him. "It's all right," he said. "I'm not here for an apology. I'm here to observe." He looked around the store slowly, taking in the details, the spotless counters, the bright lights, the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Then he looked back at the salesman. You have a beautiful store here, he said. Expensive watches, polished floors, everything shining. The salesman nodded quickly, not knowing what else to do. Thank you, sir. But, the executive continued, a store isn't truly beautiful unless people inside it are treated with the same respect as the products they sell. The words were calm. Not harsh, but they hit the salesman harder than any scolding could. His chest tightened. He wanted to say something. Anything. Maybe explain himself or say he didn't mean to offend. But the words wouldn't come. The manager tried to recover the situation. Sir, if you'd like, we can step into the office. No, the executive said quietly. I'd rather stay here. I want everyone to hear this. The store went completely still. Even the ticking of the display watches felt louder now. I came yesterday, the executive said slowly, to see how our stores treat customers who don't look like typical buyers. I wanted to see if respect depends on appearance. He paused, letting the words sink in. The salesman's hands trembled slightly. And what I saw, the executive continued, was disappointment. The salesman's heart pounded. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The executive didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult. He simply said, when you work in a place that represents success and class, you must understand, true class doesn't come from what you sell. It comes from how you treat people. The salesman nodded weakly, his eyes lowered. He wanted to apologize but didn't know how to begin. The executive looked at him kindly but with firm eyes. You were confident yesterday, he said. That's good. Confidence is valuable, but never let it turn into judgment. Because judgment blinds you, and when you're blinded, you can't see the worth of the person standing in front of you. The words stayed in the air for a long moment. Finally, the executive gave a polite nod to the manager. Please continue your day as usual. I've seen what I needed to see. He turned to leave, but before walking out, he looked back once more at the salesman. His tone softened. I believe in second chances, he said quietly. Use yours well. Then he walked out just as calmly as he had entered. The door closed behind him with a soft chime. The store stayed silent for a full minute. No one moved. The salesman finally exhaled, feeling the weight of his own mistake settle heavily in his chest. His pride had turned to shame. His confidence had turned into regret. He didn't know whether he'd still have his job tomorrow, but right now that didn't even matter. What mattered was that he had been given a lesson he'd never forget. One he hadn't just read or heard, but experienced. He looked at the display case, where the silver and blue watch still rested under the light. It looked different now, not just expensive, but symbolic. A reminder that time, respect, and humility were worth far more than any price tag. And as he stood there, quietly staring, he realized something. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come disguised as ordinary people walking through the door. The air inside the store felt heavy after the executive left. No one spoke for several minutes. The manager stood near the counter, still looking at the door as if expecting him to come back. The junior employees moved quietly, avoiding eye contact with the salesman. The only sounds were the soft hum of the air conditioner and the faint ticking of watches from the display cases. The salesman stood frozen in his spot, his face pale. His mind kept replaying the last few minutes. The calm tone of the executive, the quiet disappointment in his eyes, and that final sentence. I believe in second chances. Use yours well. Those words cut deeper than anger ever could. The manager finally broke the silence. You, he said, turning toward the salesman. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Come with me. The salesman followed him into the back office. The door closed behind them, muffling the sounds from the store. The manager placed his folder on the desk and took a deep breath before speaking. Do you have any idea what you've just done? The salesman swallowed hard. Sir, I didn't know who he was. I swear if I had known, the manager interrupted sharply. That's the problem. You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with respect. He leaned forward, his voice steady but full of disappointment. You judged a customer based on how they looked. You disrespected someone who came here with genuine interest, and that someone just happened to be one of the top executives of this company. The salesman lowered his head. I understand. I really messed up. The manager sighed, rubbing his forehead. You're lucky he didn't make an official complaint. If he had, you'd be out of a job by now. I know, the salesman said quietly. He said he believes in second chances. I'll do better. I promise. The manager looked at him for a moment, studying his face. I hope you mean that, he said. Because what happened today is going to follow you for a long time. Everyone here saw it. They saw how you treated him. And they also saw how he handled it, calmly, professionally, with dignity. You should take a lesson from that. The salesman nodded slowly. I will, sir. I really will. The manager sighed again, then gestured toward the door. Take the rest of the day to think. I'll handle the floor. The salesman hesitated. Should I apologize again if he comes back? The manager gave him a tired look. If he comes back, you won't need words. You'll need actions. Let your behavior be the apology. The salesman left the office quietly. He walked past his coworkers, who avoided looking at him. He could feel the weight of their judgment, and not cruel but disappointed. He sat on a bench near the storage area, staring at the floor. For the first time since he started working there, he felt small. He thought back to yesterday, how proud he'd felt, how sure he'd been that he could read people. He realized now how foolish that confidence had been. The man hadn't raised his voice, hadn't insulted him, hadn't even looked angry. He had just looked sad, and that sadness hurt more than anything. As the hours passed, the salesman didn't say much. He helped where he could, stayed quiet, and kept his eyes low. When the store closed, he lingered behind, helping to wipe down the counters even though it wasn't his turn. The manager noticed but didn't say anything. That night, the salesman couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the executive's face, calm, composed, disappointed. He replayed every word he had said that first day, and each one stung more than the last. The next morning, he arrived at the store an hour early. He stood outside for a few minutes, watching the reflection of the store's name on the glass door. It used to make him feel proud. Now it reminded him of responsibility, something he hadn't taken seriously before. When the manager arrived, the salesman greeted him quietly and got straight to work. No excuses, no complaints, no idle talk. He greeted every customer with genuine warmth. He offered them water, smiled sincerely, and listened carefully to their questions. He didn't rush anyone or assume anything. By noon, the atmosphere around him began to shift. The junior employees noticed the change. One of them whispered, "He's like a different person today." Another replied, "Maybe yesterday changed him." And it had. Later that afternoon, the manager called him over. "Head office wants an update on yesterday's visit," he said. "They didn't file any formal report, but they want me to explain what happened." The salesman felt his chest tighten. "Will I lose my job?" he asked softly. The manager looked at him. "Not yet, but this is your chance to prove yourself. Actions matter now." The salesman nodded. "Understood." That evening, after the store closed, he sat alone by the window watching people pass by outside. The city lights reflected off the glass, making the streets look alive with color. He thought about how quickly life could turn. One moment you're confident, the next you're humbled. He decided that from now on he would do his job differently. Not because someone might be important, but because everyone was important in their own way. A few days later, the manager told the team that the company would be conducting customer service training. "It's coming from the regional office," he said. "Apparently, they want every branch to refresh their standards." The salesman felt his stomach twist. He knew the training was a direct result of his mistake. Still, he was grateful. It meant the company hadn't given up on him. The following week, a representative from the regional office came to lead the training. She spoke about respect, communication, and perception. "You never know who you're speaking to," she said. "It could be a millionaire or someone saving for years just to afford one special item. Either way, they deserve the same kindness." The salesman listened carefully, taking notes. Every word felt personal. When she finished, she asked if anyone wanted to share a recent experience that taught them something about customer service. There was a pause. No one spoke. Then slowly the salesman raised his hand. He stood up and said quietly, "I had a situation recently where I misjudged a customer. I thought I could tell who was serious and who wasn't, just by how they looked. I was wrong. I realized that respect isn't something you give only to people who look like they can afford it. It's something you give to everyone, no matter what." The room was silent. Even the manager looked surprised by his honesty. The trainer nodded approvingly. "That's a brave thing to admit," she said. "And it's an important lesson. Sometimes the hardest way to learn is also the most powerful." After the session, a few coworkers came up to him quietly. One of them said, "It takes guts to admit that." "I respect that." Another added, "We all make mistakes. What matters is learning from them." The salesman smiled faintly, feeling a small weight lift off his shoulders. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. That night, as he walked home, the city lights flickered above him. He passed by another store, not as luxurious as his, but still elegant. Through the window, he saw a young employee talking to a customer. The employee looked impatient, uninterested. The salesman paused, watching silently for a moment. Remembering how he used to be, he whispered to himself, "I know that look." Then he smiled sadly and walked on. The next few weeks brought small but noticeable changes. The salesman's attitude softened. Customers began leaving positive feedback, mentioning his patience and sincerity. Even the manager started trusting him again, giving him responsibilities he hadn't handled before. One afternoon, as he was organizing the display, the store's phone rang. The manager picked it up, spoke briefly, and then looked toward the salesman. "It's for you," he said. The salesman frowned, surprised. "For me?" "Yes," the manager said, handing over the phone. He took it carefully. "Hello?" A familiar, calm voice answered. "Good afternoon." "This is Williams." The salesman froze. His throat went dry. "Sir, good afternoon," he managed to say softly. "I just wanted to check in," the executive said. "I heard about the new training and the improvements in customer service. I also received feedback about how well you've been doing lately." The salesman felt his heart race. "Thank you, sir. I've been trying to do better every day." The executive's voice was gentle. "I can see that. I wanted you to know that what matters isn't perfection, it's growth. Mistakes happen. What defines you is how you rise after them." The salesman stood silent for a moment, holding the phone tightly. "I won't forget that, sir," he said finally. "I believe you won't," the executive said kindly. "Take care." The call ended. The salesman stood there for a long time, still holding the phone, feeling a strange mix of relief and gratitude. That evening, when the store closed, he stayed back again to clean the counters. The lights reflected on the silver and blue watch, the same one that had started it all. He smiled faintly, whispering, "You taught me more than I expected." He didn't mean the watch. He meant the lesson. And as he turned off the lights and stepped outside, he carried that lesson with him, quietly, humbly, and permanently. The air in the store was heavy after the reveal. No one said a word for several seconds. The executive stood quietly, his calm expression sharper than any angry outburst could have been. The salesman's face was pale. His confidence was gone, replaced with nervous guilt. He looked like he wanted to disappear into the glass counter. The store manager was the first to break the silence. He spoke in a polite but shaky tone, trying to manage the situation before it got worse. "Sir, I'm truly sorry for what happened. If we had known you were visiting, we would have—" The executive raised a hand gently, cutting him off. "That's the problem," he said softly. "You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them right." The manager swallowed hard and nodded. The words hit everyone in the room. The salesman stared down at the counter, his reflection looking back at him. A reflection he didn't like at that moment. The executive didn't yell or show anger. Instead, he spoke calmly, his voice firm but even. "I came here today like any other customer. I wanted to see how your staff interacts with people, without titles, without introductions. And now I know." The manager apologized again, his voice filled with worry. "We'll make sure this never happens again. I'll personally handle it." The executive looked at him, then at the salesman. "It's not about punishment," he said quietly. "It's about understanding. I just hope this becomes a moment you both remember." He then turned slightly toward the salesman, whose hands were still trembling. "Tell me something," the executive said gently. "What made you decide I didn't deserve the same respect as the others who walked in today?" The salesman hesitated, his throat dry. "Sir, I didn't mean to disrespect you. You assumed," the executive finished for him. "You looked at me and decided who I was. Maybe you thought my clothes weren't right for this place. Maybe you thought people like me don't buy things like this. Am I wrong?" The salesman's lips trembled slightly. He wanted to deny it, but deep down he knew it was true. "I guess I made a bad judgment," he whispered. The executive nodded slowly. "We all make mistakes," he said. "But some mistakes carry lessons. You didn't just insult a customer. You insulted the values this company stands for." There was a deep silence after that. The other employees watched, feeling uncomfortable yet strangely moved. They had all seen rude customers, angry complaints, or messy sales moments, but this was different. This wasn't about money or sales. It was about decency. The executive continued, still calm. "When you work in a place like this, you meet all kinds of people. Some come in wearing luxury suits, others in old jeans. But money doesn't define manners, and appearance doesn't define worth." The salesman nodded weakly, unable to look him in the eyes. "You're right," he said quietly. The manager offered, "Sir, if you'll allow me, we can take this to my office and—" "No," the executive interrupted softly. "This should stay here. Let everyone hear this, because this isn't just about one mistake. It's about a mindset that needs to change." Everyone stood frozen. Even customers who had been browsing earlier stopped pretending to look at watches. They were listening too. The executive turned to the rest of the staff and said, "Every person who walks through that door deserves your attention and respect. Whether they're spending $100 or $100,000, it doesn't matter. What matters is how you make them feel." The words were steady, but they carried weight. The staff nodded silently, understanding that this was a message for all of them. The executive looked back at the salesman. "You remind me of myself when I was younger," he said, surprising everyone. "I once made a similar mistake. I misjudged someone because of how they looked. And I learned the same lesson you're learning now." The salesman looked up slowly, surprised. The executive gave a faint smile. "The difference is I got my second chance. You'll get yours too, but only if you remember this moment." The salesman took a deep breath. His voice cracked slightly when he said, "Thank you, sir. I truly am sorry. I was wrong." The executive nodded. "Apology accepted," he said simply. "Just make sure your actions speak louder from now on." He turned to leave, shaking the manager's hand before walking toward the door. But before stepping out, he paused and glanced back. "Oh, and one more thing," he said. "You might want to review how your team is trained. Kindness doesn't cost the company anything, but the lack of it can cost everything." With that, he left the store, the door slowly closing behind him. The sound of the bell above the door echoed through the quiet room. For a moment, nobody moved. The manager sighed heavily and turned toward the salesman. "Do you realize what just happened?" he asked. The salesman nodded slowly, still shaken. "I do," he said softly. "And I'll never forget it." The manager rubbed his forehead. "That man could have fired all of us if he wanted. He could have shut this store down." "I know," the salesman replied quietly, "but he didn't." "That's what makes it worse," the manager said. "He didn't yell, he didn't threaten, he just told the truth. That's harder to forget." The salesman stood there for a long time, lost in thought. His reflection in the glass case looked different now. The confident smirk he had earlier was gone. What remained was someone humbled and changed. Later that day, after the store closed, he stayed behind to help the cleaner tidy up. Nobody asked him to, but he wanted to. It felt like the least he could do. As he wiped the counter where the executive had stood, he thought about his words again. Respect shouldn't depend on appearance. Those words stayed in his head all night. When he went home, he couldn't stop thinking about how many people he might have treated the same way in the past without realizing it. Maybe someone had walked in before, someone he brushed off because they didn't look rich enough. The thought made him feel uneasy. That night, he barely slept. He kept replaying the scene in his mind. The calm tone, the disappointment in the executive's eyes, the weight of his words. He didn't shout, didn't embarrass him with insults. He just made him face the truth. By morning, something inside him felt different. He wasn't just embarrassed anymore, and he was determined. He wanted to become better, not just a better salesman, but a better person. When he reached the store the next day, he arrived early. The manager was surprised to see him there before opening time. "You're early," the manager said. "I wanted to start fresh," the salesman replied simply. "I've got a lot to make up for." The manager studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Good," he said, "because the company sent a memo this morning. The executive has ordered a complete customer service retraining program for every store in this region." The salesman wasn't surprised. "We need it," he said honestly. For the next few weeks, things changed. The team attended workshops about empathy, communication, and professionalism. They learned how to treat every customer equally. The salesman threw himself into it more than anyone. He volunteered for extra training, read about emotional intelligence, and started paying attention to small details: tone, eye contact, patience. He began greeting everyone who entered the store with a genuine smile, no matter how they looked. Some people came in wearing fancy clothes, others wore simple t-shirts, but this time he saw them all the same, as people, not as potential sales. Slowly, the atmosphere in the store began to change. Customers noticed. Reviews improved. Even the manager felt proud seeing the transformation. One evening, as they were closing up, the manager approached him and said, "I have to admit, you've changed." The salesman smiled faintly. "I had to," he said. "I don't ever want to feel that kind of shame again." The manager nodded. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones that stick the longest. Later that week, a company-wide meeting was announced. The executive was going to visit again, not for inspection but for a talk about values. The salesman's heart pounded when he heard the news. He wondered if the executive would remember him. When the day came, the executive walked into the meeting room. His calm presence filled the space again, but this time the salesman didn't feel fear. He felt gratitude. The executive spoke about respect, humility, and how small moments can shape a company's future. At one point, his eyes met the salesman's. For a brief second, the salesman thought he saw a faint smile, one of quiet acknowledgement. That small gesture meant more than any words could. From that day on, the salesman carried that moment with him everywhere. Every handshake, every smile, every interaction reminded him of that lesson. He knew he could never undo what he had done, but he could make sure it never happened again. Not from him, and hopefully, not from anyone he worked with. The store never forgot that day. People still whispered about the time the executive came unannounced. But for the salesman, it wasn't a story of embarrassment anymore. It was a turning point, the day he truly understood what respect means. And for the executive somewhere miles away, it was just another quiet victory. Proof that real leadership doesn't always come from authority, but from the courage to correct with kindness. The weeks after the executive's visit changed everything for the salesman. The store felt different now. The walls, the lights, even the scent of polished wood. Everything seemed to remind him of that moment when he realized how wrong he had been. He didn't just change how he spoke to people. He changed how he looked at them. Every morning he came in early, checked the displays carefully, and made sure everything looked perfect. But more than the watches, he focused on people. Whenever someone walked through the glass door, he greeted them with a warm smile, no matter how they were dressed. If they looked lost, he guided them. If they seemed nervous, he eased them with calm words the other employees noticed. Some whispered that he was trying too hard, but others admired him. They could see that this wasn't an act. Something real had shifted inside him. He was no longer chasing sales. He was chasing something more meaningful: self-respect. One afternoon, a middle-aged man entered the store wearing old jeans and a faded shirt. He looked tired, maybe from a long day at work. The salesman walked up with a genuine smile and said, "Welcome in, sir. Please take your time. If you need any help, I'm right here." The man seemed hesitant. "I'm just looking," he said softly. "No problem at all," the salesman replied. "We have some beautiful models today. Take a look around." The man nodded and slowly walked along the counter. After a few minutes, he stopped in front of one of the mid-range watches. Not the most expensive one, but still elegant. He looked at it for a long time, almost as if he was lost in thought. The salesman approached gently and said, "That one's special. It's not the priciest, but it's one of our most loved designs. Strong build, simple face, long life." The man smiled faintly. "It's nice," he said. "It reminds me of one my father had years ago." They began talking, not just about watches, but about life. The man said he had been saving up to buy something meaningful for his son's graduation. "He's the first in our family to go to college," he said proudly. The salesman listened closely, feeling genuine warmth for the stranger's story. "That's something to celebrate," he said. "Your son's lucky to have a father like you." The man chuckled. "Well, I'm not sure about lucky, but I'm proud of him." The salesman offered him a small discount, something within his power to do. "For a moment like that," he said, "a few dollars shouldn't stand in the way." The man hesitated, then smiled. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That means a lot." When the man left, the salesman felt lighter inside. It wasn't about money. It was about the connection, something he used to ignore. Over the next few months, more moments like that happened. He learned that everyone who walked through the door carried a story, sometimes hidden behind simple clothes, sometimes behind fancy suits. But every story mattered. The store's atmosphere slowly changed too. The team grew more united. They began helping each other, sharing smiles instead of competing. Customers started noticing. Reviews improved. People wrote about how they felt respected the moment they stepped in. One day, the manager called a team meeting. Everyone gathered near the counter. "I have some good news," the manager announced. "Our store's customer satisfaction ratings just hit the highest in the region." Headquarters noticed. There were smiles and quiet cheers around the room. The salesman clapped too, feeling proud. The manager continued, "And there's more. The executive who visited us a while ago, he's coming back. Not for an inspection this time, but for something else." The salesman felt his heart skip. He hadn't seen the executive since that unforgettable day. The idea of facing him again filled him with both excitement and nervousness. When the day came, the store was spotless. The staff stood straight, polished, and ready. But there was no tension this time, just anticipation. The glass door opened and the executive walked in, the same calm smile on his face. Everyone greeted him warmly. He shook a few hands and nodded approvingly as he looked around. When his eyes met the salesman's, a brief moment of silence passed, not of discomfort, but of quiet understanding. The manager stepped forward. "Sir, welcome back. We've made many improvements since your last visit." "I can see that," the executive said. His voice carried warmth. "The atmosphere feels different, lighter." He walked around the store, talking to customers, watching how the staff interacted. The salesman assisted a woman looking for a watch for her husband, speaking with genuine care. The executive observed quietly, not interrupting, just watching. After the woman left, the executive approached him. "You've been busy," he said kindly. The salesman smiled nervously. "Trying to be better every day, sir." The executive looked at him for a moment, then said softly, "I can see that. You've done well." That simple sentence meant more to him than any bonus or award ever could. The manager joined them, smiling proudly. "He's changed a lot, sir. Leads by example now." The executive nodded. "That's what growth looks like," he said. "Sometimes one hard moment can teach what years of training can't." They spoke for a few more minutes, but the conversation felt easy this time. Not formal, not heavy. It was human. Before leaving, the executive shook his hand again. "I'm glad you stayed," he said quietly. "Some people run from mistakes. You learned from yours." The salesman's voice was soft. "Thank you for giving me that chance." The executive smiled. Everyone deserves one. After he left, the whole store felt uplifted. The team congratulated the salesman, not with loud claps, but with genuine smiles. They all knew how far he had come. That evening, as the store lights dimmed and the doors locked, the salesman stood alone for a moment, looking at the reflection of the watches in the glass. The ticking of the display clocks filled the quiet room. He thought about how time had changed him, how a single afternoon had reshaped his entire outlook on people, work, and life. He remembered the old version of himself, the one who judged too quickly, who thought success came from looking sharp and selling fast. That person was gone now. In his place stood someone slower to speak, quicker to listen, and more grateful than ever. A week later, a small envelope arrived at the store addressed to him. Inside was a handwritten note from the executive. It said, "True professionalism begins with humility. I'm proud of your growth. Keep leading with kindness. It travels further than you think." Below it was a small company badge, engraved with the words, "Customer Excellence Award." He stared at it for a long time, then smiled. It wasn't the award that touched him most. It was the thought that someone had believed he could change. From that day onward, he made it his mission to teach new hires the same lesson. Whenever a new salesperson joined, he would tell them, "The most important thing in this store isn't the watch, it's the person wearing it." Sometimes, he would see a customer come in wearing simple clothes, and he'd smile quietly, remembering how it all began. The memory still made him wince a little, but it also gave him purpose. Months turned into years. The store flourished. The team became known for its warm service. Some customers even came from other cities just because they had heard how respectful and kind the staff were. One evening, the salesman stood by the counter, watching the sunset through the glass door. The golden light reflected off the watches, making them sparkle. A young boy, maybe in his late teens, walked in with his mother. They looked around curiously, a little unsure. The salesman approached with his usual friendly smile. "Welcome," he said gently. "Is this your first time visiting us?" The boy nodded shyly. "We're just looking," he said. "That's perfectly fine," the salesman replied. "Take your time. Everything here has a story just like you." The boy grinned and his mother relaxed. They looked at the watches together, and before long the boy found one he liked. As they left, the mother said, "Thank you for treating us so kindly. Some places don't." The salesman's smile was soft but real. "Everyone deserves kindness," he said. When they walked out, he stood still for a moment, letting the quiet pride settle in his chest. It was the same store, the same glass counters, the same ticking clocks, but everything felt new again because he was new. Later that night, as he closed the shop, he thought again about the executive, the man who could have punished him but chose instead to teach him. That act of grace had changed more than one person's heart. It had transformed an entire workplace. He turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped outside. The city lights shimmered against the dark sky. He looked at his own reflection in the window and smiled. He was no longer the man who had once turned someone away. He was the man who welcomed everyone in. And somewhere far away in a quiet office, the executive looked over the company's reports, saw the remarkable progress of that same store, and smiled knowingly. He didn't need to visit again. He already knew. The lesson had taken root. The salesman never forgot what happened that day. It became part of him, a reminder that one small act of prejudice can break trust, but one act of understanding can rebuild it stronger than before. And from then on, every person who walked into that luxury watch store, rich, poor, young, or old, was greeted the same way, with respect, patience, and a smile that said, "You matter." Because sometimes, the most powerful change doesn't come from anger or punishment. It comes from quiet correction, honest reflection, and the will to become better than you were yesterday. And that was exactly what he did.